This is interviewer Kim Rivers for the Samuel Proctor Oral History Project and the Florida Park Service. Today is May 26th, 2024. We're at the 72nd Annual Florida Folk Festival, White Springs, Florida. And we're here with Lloyd.
Right.
Lloyd, will you please say your full name, when you were born, and where you were born?
Okay, a full name, Lloyd Weaver Baldwin. My birthday is July 21st, 1950. I'm a Florida cracker. I was born in Daytona Beach, Florida. My folks, we actually lived in Flagler County, but back then there was only one doctor in the entire county, and he was not an OB type, so my mom had to go to Daytona to have her kids. So I consider myself a Flagler County native, but I was actually born in Daytona Beach.
And where do you live now?
I live in Branford, Florida. Just not too far from here. It's about 40 miles as the crow flies and about 100 river miles. It's on the southern part of the Swanee River.
How did you wind up here from over there in Flagler?
My dad he taught vocational agriculture, and he was teaching in Bunnell, and that job dried up. We moved from there to Melrose, which is east side of east of Gainesville, about 20 miles, and that's really where I grew up. We lived there from 1956 to 66, and then when I was a junior in high school, we moved to Branford, and that's where my parents settled, and I've been in and out of there for many years, and I've both my parents are long gone now, but I've decided to make it my home.
How'd you ever find out about the Florida Folk Festival?
I think it found us. I graduated college in '73, graduated University of Florida. And in '72, I had, since high school, I had been dabbling with playing guitar a little bit. I had an electric guitar and stuff. And in 1972, I heard a tape of Doc Watson. I said, oh man, I got to do some of that. I got rid of all the electric stuff, got a little acoustic guitar, got interested in banjo, and I couldn't afford to buy one being a student. So I built my own banjo with my dad's help. He had access to the shop at the school in Branford, so that's where I did the woodwork. And that shortly led to the fiddle. And in the early '70s, that was when the Vietnam War was winding down, and there were a lot of young people my age, kind of getting back to the earth, going for simpler lives and that sort of thing. So we were naturally led to acoustic old-time music. It's pretty organic in the way it's played. And my brother started playing guitar about the same time, and we were living together in Melrose. And we started running into a few other people with the same interest. And 1976, the bicentennial wagon train came through. And we thought, oh, bicentennial, we play early American music, we can make some money off of the bicentennial. So there was a couple, Dwight Rogers and Gail Gillespie in Gainesville, and another fiddler and dance caller named Mike Kemp. And the five of us, Dwight, Gail, Mike, my brother Brent, and me, formed a band. We called ourselves the Bucks North Barn Dance Band, and we started getting some gigs. We actually got a gig with the bicentennial wagon train, and we shortly heard about the folk festival, and the Cross Creek Cloggers from Gainesville were forming about that time too. So we became their house band, and we played here at the folk festival the first time in 1977. So that was an interesting. Can I tell a story about that?
Yeah, that's the whole thing. That's why I want to hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
All
Lord.
right. Well, we had a certain time we were supposed to be on the amphitheater stage. And of course, Cousin Thelma was the MC, and Barbara Beecham was running backstage. And my brother and I stopped in Branford on the way over here to have lunch with my parents, and we dallied a little too long there and came rushing over to the festival. We were running late, and we got to the top of the hill, parked the truck above the amphitheater. We were running a couple of minutes late, so we grabbed our instruments and ran down to the stage, and we didn't have our shoes on. we were barefooted. And we got to the back of the stage there, and Barbara Beecham met us. Said, "Where are your shoes?" I said, "Well, they're back in the truck." She says, "You can't go on without shoes." I said, "We're late, we're late." "You can't go on without shoes." And so the cloggers were there. They had changed into their taps, and we wound up borrowing a couple of pairs of shoes from the cloggers and wore them up on stage to play the gig. And at the end of the event or the set, I was kind of a bad boy. I kicked my shoes off and waved them in the air. But Barbara and I became very good friends afterwards, and she was a force of nature. She was really the, Cousin Thelma was the lady up front, but Barbara was the one that made it run backstage. So those were good times.
I've often heard that retold where it's Cousin Thelma. Now we know.
Yeah.
It was Miss Barbara.
Yeah, it was Barbara, definitely. But she always had the best interests of the festival in mind, And it took us a little while, but when we realized that we were on to something bigger than just another party.
Well, speaking of that, there's kind of like a hippie mythology around the festival back in the 70s. Can you share anything about how it was back then?
Well, the hippie times were like 72, 73. I think 73 was the year that all of the hippies from the university came over and kind of took over, and they were, naked swimming in the Swanee and all that stuff. And I don't recall being here. It's one of those, if you remember being there, then you probably weren't. But I don't think I came over for that. I was graduating that spring, and I had a lot to do to finish my degree up. So I wasn't in on that. But apparently it was enough of a stir that the next year they moved the festival to Labor Day weekend for a couple of years to lose the college crowd until that generation graduated, and then the next ones didn't know about it so much. So that's about all I know about those years. Yeah, we came in later in the 70s. We started the first year here in 77.
Do you know how many folk festivals you've participated in?
Well, it's 47 years, but I haven't been to every one of them. We played here every year until probably 83, in some manner or another. I left the Bucksnort Band in 1980 when I started working up in Swanee County, and kept coming to the festival in one way or another. In fact, I've got a picture that was taken back then. It's Don Grooms playing the guitar and me playing the fiddle. And I was walking around here a few years ago, and there was that picture sitting on the desk of the State Archives people. They had a booth set up, and I saw that picture. And this young lady was sitting behind the desk, and I said, "What's the story on this picture?" And she said, "We know that's Don Grooms, but we don't know who the fiddler is." And that was, my hair was dark, and I had on a hat, a straw hat. So I picked it up and held it up. I said, "You just found him." And they wound up giving me the picture. So, and it was taken in 1983. So that was the last one I came to for a while. I moved up to Alabama that year for work. and lived up there until 1990. And I would come down for the festival if I could. I was married for a while, and my wife didn't particularly like the heat and that sort of thing. So I missed a couple of festivals in the late 80s, but I tried to get down here to as many as I could. Even though I wasn't participating, I liked to come down, sneak in and camp, and just hang out with my buddies. And then I have been here every year since 1990. I came back, moved back to Florida in 1990, and been here ever since. Been playing at the festival every year since then.
You mentioned Don Grooms.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about Don Grooms?
Yeah, he was quite a character. He was born and raised on the Cherokee Reservation up in North Carolina. He was born, I think, in the late 30s, 37, 38, around in there. And he was a journalism professor at University of Florida. He's some proportion, somewhere around 50% Cherokee, maybe even a little less, but he looked like a Cherokee, you know, the dark skin. He wore his hair fairly long, down about his ear length. And the first time I met Don, it was late 70s. I had not been playing too long. And I had a buddy that I had met, fiddling buddy named Ed Partridge, and he said, hey, you gotta come hear this Don Grooms guy. And so I went to a restaurant that Don was playing at, and Ed introduced us. And Don was going through his set list with his side man, and he said something about, let's do Standing Bear. And I said, oh, like Running Bear, Little White Dove? He just kind of looked at me, he said, no. And when he did it, let's see, I'm trying to jog my memory. When he did that song, it turned out to be Standing Bear, who was the, let's see, I forget the years, late 1800s. He was the Indian that was in the court case where the courts decided that Indians were human beings. Sorry.
You're good.
But old Don had a message. And we got to be pretty good friends. And I played with him. I don't know that I played with him on stage at the festival, but we were in the campground, a lot of picking sessions, and we used to, every Saturday night about midnight, we would do the Arkansas Traveler with the jokes down at the campground. And one thing about Don, he one year at the festival, he had a fire going at his campsite, and you weren't supposed to have fires in the campground then. But a ranger came up. There were about 6 or 8 of us sitting around the fire, and this ranger came up and says, howdy. And Don says, hey there. He says, nice fire. Don says, thank you. And the ranger said, you know you're not supposed to have fires in the campground. And Don said, yeah. And the ranger said, well, you gonna do something about it? And Don says, nope. And he said, why not? Don said, because there's 6 of us and 1 of you. And the ranger tipped his hat and said, well, have a nice festival, and walked off. And I don't know whether it's that year or another year, but Don had written a song about travelers, people from the north coming down into Florida, about Winnebagos. You know, Gaulder and Winnebago. This is a man from Michigan and the Gaulder and Winnebago. Well, we were sitting around at Don's camp, and this huge Winnebago, big old dual axle Winnebago, came crawling through the campground. pulled up right next to Don's camp, and we're all sitting there going, who is this clown? And pretty soon the motor shut down, the window came open, and a recording of Don singing "Gol Darn Winnebagos" came out the window at full volume, and whoever was in there started going, "Yeehaw, yeehaw!" It turned out to be Jim Billy, the Seminole chief. He and Don were big friends, and Don was just, I don't know, he had come up pretty hard up in the North Carolina hills without a lot of money during the Depression, but he became quite well educated. He went to, I know he had a master's in journalism, and I know he had got one of his degrees at Southern Cal, or UCLA, that's where it was. But he was a journalism professor at the university and quite good at his craft, and he was also a heck of a songwriter. He wrote a lot of songs about Florida and about Indian affairs, you know, that Standing Bear being an example. He wrote one about Solly, who was a Cherokee chief who escaped from the Trail of Tears and stayed up in Carolina, and his descendants are the ones that are up there now on the reservation. And when we'd play a gig with Don, he would stand up on stage and he'd say, "Well, Jesus died for you white people, but Solly died for me."
Don Grooms had a certain look, or like something he always wore. What was that?
He had a little gold, I think it was a hawk. It was either a hawk or an eagle that he kept around his neck. And I can't quite recall the story of that. It may have been something that James gave him, James Billy. But he always had that on. Yeah.
You know James Billy?
Yeah.
Could you tell us about him and the festival?
Yeah, he was, well, that time he pulled up next to Don and started playing Gol Darn Winnebagos. It wasn't long before he had his camp set up, and he was a guitar player. Still is, I guess. Well, I don't know, he's got arthritis pretty bad, but at that time he was in his prime. This would have been early 80s. And he got out of his camper and sitting in a chair playing his guitar, just goofing around on his guitar, and his wife leaned out the window and started talking to him in their native language, and we weren't really listening. We could just hear them over to the side, and after a little while, she said, it kind of quieted down, and he looked right at her and he said, "Booga booga hungawa," like the old Tarzan movies. We just cracked up. We looked over there, and he laughed. He says, "I didn't know y'all spoke Seminole." So that's the kind of guy he was around us. He was just a real cut up, you know, and he wrote some pretty neat songs too. The Big Alligator's one that I learned. And I do that when I'm paddling on the Swanee River. So yeah, I don't see James much. I did see him when he came for the debut of the movie that was made about him a few years ago. So, I do have one other story about him. My friend Wanda Lee from Flagler Beach, she and her late husband, J.U., put together a bunch of Florida-type songs, and they put out a CD back in the early 90s, and she wanted to do a songbook and do another release of the CD, but she had lost track of where the masters were, and she remembered the name of the guy that did the recording, and she knew that Jim Billy knew that guy, so she said, "I need to talk to James Billy." So I said, "Okay, we'll fix that up." So she came to the festival that year, And one evening, we went and found James's camp. He was camped right next to Frank Thomas. And he was sitting back at the back end of his camp. There was a lot of lights all around, a lot of people milling around, and James was sitting up in his chair. He had two of his kids, one on either side, and he looked kind of regal back there. So, so I brought Wanda back there and said, "Chief Billy, I brought you a woman." So, but he was very gracious. He got her hooked up with the guy that had the masters, helped her get her recordings done. So, so he's a good man.
I was happy to hear Frank Thomas's name.
Mm-hmm.
What could you tell me about him?
Oh, Frank, go way back with Frank. I mentioned earlier, lived in Melrose in the most of the 70s. I actually lived there when I was in college and then stayed there for several more years until I came up, started working in Live Oak. And Frank, he was dating a girl whose family was there in Melrose. So I met him around the time I started playing music, in the early 70s. And that was quite a bunch he was hanging with there. And I did not know Frank real well, but I knew him to say, "Hey, how's the wife and kids?" You know, that kind of thing. And he knew me, he knew my brother, and he always spoke to us when we were around. And I did go down to his place one time back years ago, and played a few tunes with him. So I knew him, but you know, not like a bosom buddy.
How about Will McLean?
Yo.
We're doing the top artists, right?
Yeah, yes, I knew Will too. I met him about the same time I met Don, because you know they were running mates, and we got to be friends with Will. And Will was he was a talented poet and songwriter, and he was the most gracious human being, a Southern gentleman you'd want to meet when he was sober, which was not very often. And he, at that time, this was mid-70s, he was just living out of his van. He would go camp in people's yards for a while, and after a couple of weeks, he'd move on. So he spent a good amount of time in my yard, in his van. My brother and I, we'd bring him in cold weather and let him sit by the fire and all. And at one point, he had recorded an album, an LP, with just a plain white cover, and he gave me a copy of it one time. He said, "To a great artist, from Will," and all this stuff. And I had it about 2 weeks. And my brother and I, we had started some jam sessions every Wednesday night. People could come over and play music, and just acoustic music. And actually those jams are still going on in Gainesville in some form or another. But Will came to one of those a couple of weeks after he gave me that album, and two of my friends brought their wives with them that night. And these were beautiful, young, statuesque women. And they got there and said, and we said, "This is Will McLean." And they said, "Are you Will McLean, the famous songwriter?" He said, "Yeah." And he sat down on the couch, and one of those girls got on either side of him. They were leaning up against him and talking to him, and he went nuts. He jumped up. He said, Lloyd, give me that record. I'll get you another one." So I gave him the record, and he gave it to one of those girls. I never saw another copy of it. But yeah, Will was a regular at our Wednesday night sessions, and you know, I went over, we'd play with him regularly there. I don't recall ever doing a stage gig with Will, but jam sessions, we did play a lot with him. And, you know, we'd go over to St. Augustine with him once in a while and play a little bit, and got to know him pretty well. And like I say, I prefer to remember him as a gentleman. But he was another force of nature.
How about Gamble Rogers?
Gamble, I knew Gamble, here again, not as a bosom buddy, but I had seen him around enough to where it was howdy do, and I think he knew my name. He was, if he didn't, he was very gracious. He even let me hold and play one of his guitars one time after a gig in Gainesville. But I never missed a chance to go see Gamble. He was wonderful. I mean, I'm a native. I'm a Florida cracker, and you know, those are the characters that Gamble talked about. I knew people who were like all of those characters, and the places he described. You know, nobody has nailed Florida like Gamble did, and he was quite another sterling Floridian, I guess you would say. And just really miss him. And I remember the day we heard about him, when he passed.
Are you able to share the story of what happened?
What happened to Gamble?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, he had, well, you can see it in the movie that just came out. I went to see it last night. He had childhood arthritis, and he had several of the vertebrae in his neck fused when he was young. So he had chronic back issues his whole life. And he liked to get out on the water, you know, and he and some friends were camping down near Flagler Beach, and they get riptides down there. And you know, you can deal with riptides. You know, they'll carry your way out in the water, but if you swim sideways, you can swim out of them. But people who come in from other places don't know about that, and I believe it was some people from Canada were down, as I recall. And one of them got in that riptide and got carried out, and Gamble didn't even think twice. He grabbed his float and headed out into the water. But he had, you know, the water was pretty rough, and he couldn't really, I don't know whether he couldn't maintain his buoyancy or he couldn't, something to do with his back. He couldn't maneuver around like he should have in that situation, and he drowned too. Both the person he's trying to save and he, both of them drowned, but they recovered the body soon afterwards.
So of course there's a Gamble Rogers State Park.
Recreation area. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's just south of Flagler Beach. Yep. Yeah, old Gamble. I still, I know when I'm on stage and start telling yarns about people I've known, Gamble's been an inspiration for that. Like, I've got a bunch of tales about my old Aunt Thelma in Alabama. She was a good old country girl that lived to 101. And I've got a lot of yarns about her.
Would you do us one?
Well, yeah. I do this song called Chicken Roost Blues. And it was written in the 20s. It's about some guy who sneaks into somebody's chicken house and grabs a sack full of chickens and runs out, and the farmer finds him and shoots him with a load of bird shot in the rear end. And he goes back home and tries to get to sleep, but the rooster keeps crowing and waking him up, and about 2 o'clock in the morning the sheriff comes in and gets him. So it's a whole topical song, but I kind of tie that to, I went up to see Thelma one time to visit her, and she always kept a flock of chickens. And at that time, she said, well, I've been having some chicken trouble. I said, what's that, Thelma? And she said, I've been losing some chickens. I said, losing them? She said, yeah, for a while there, it seemed like my chicken flock was getting a little smaller, so I started counting them. And just about every Sunday morning, I'd be a couple of hens short. And I got to asking around, I set some traps. You know, a possum or a coon will get in and just ravage a chicken house. She said, I didn't catch anything with the trap, but I got to asking around. And there were two old brothers who lived down the road from her. They still lived in the cabin they were born in. And she said, and I found out there was a trailer park went in up the road, and some sorry women had moved in there. And those two old boys were coming in on Saturday night and grabbing a couple of chickens and heading up to the trailer park to see them sorry women. And she said, I put a stop to that quick. But I got thinking, you know, what can you get for live chicken on a Saturday night in Alabama? that must be the last good deal in Alabama. You know? So just stuff like that Gamble was really a trailblazer for that kind of pattern on stage, linking up with the songs, and he's been an inspiration for me, whether he knew it or not.
So you, not too many years ago, you just were awarded the Legends and Legacies.
Yep, last year.
What in the world? Why did that happen?
Well, I'm trying to figure that out myself, especially since they didn't put Gamble in there till this year. And I'm thinking, why in the world did they put me in there before they put Gamble in there? Well, it's just, I guess it's an honor, I guess, bestowed by the Citizen Support Organization for people who've been involved in the folk festival. And I've been here, like I say, it's been 47 years, almost half a century, and I hope it is half a century. You know, I'm still around for that. But I love it. This is my major event of the year, as far as I'm concerned. It's the one that I always plan the rest of my time around. And I've got a crew of folks that come in, some of them from other states every year to, this is where we gather and sing our songs and spin our yarns and perform. And it's been a great thing for me in my life, and I guess they think that I've helped to keep it going.
What is it about the Florida Folk Festival that makes you favor it so?
Well, it's for one thing, it's got a variety of stuff. You know, I play old time music, play clawhammer style banjo, play fiddle tunes, and that sort of thing. And there's an old time community around the state, and we get together at various times of the year. But you know, over the years, I've met a lot of different people who play different kinds of music here, and I love to listen to it, like Jeannie Fitchin. I remember her when she was a teenager here, and I remember thinking the first time I heard her sing, it was like a bell ringing. Her voice was so clear and pretty. And of course, it's where you see Gamble Rogers back in the days, where you could come see Will and Don Grooms and their buddies on the stage at the same time. And they've got a dance stage. We can play for dances here. We can do stage shows. We can do workshops. It's just I think it's the big variety, and it's Florida centric. You know, and it's not palm trees and flamingos type Florida. It's cracker Florida. And well, and other cultures too. You know, there's a lot of variety in the cultures around the state. So it just kind of wraps everybody up in one place, and everybody seems to get along and have a good time together.
Would you describe any changes over the years that you've noticed in the festival?
Well, it changes from year to year, depending on who's running it. Well, one big thing is the campground has gotten a lot better. I know when I first came here, the campground was just basically one bathroom or bathhouse in the middle of the campground. It had men on one side and women on the other, and it was just free for all out in the camping space, and you just tried to get here soon enough to stake you out some territory for you and your buddies, and the septic tank always overflowed. They had to run the honey dipper in here 2 or 3 times a day to keep it pumped out. So the campgrounds are much nicer. And you know, I've been to so many of them. It's starting to kind of run together as to what went on in what years, you know. But it's just always been a great time, and had a lot of variety of stuff here to do. It's had its ups and downs over the years, but I hope we can keep it going, at least as long as I'm around to participate.
How do you think we could keep it going?
Well, you know, that depends a lot on the politics of the state. There's been instances in the past where there have been rumors flying around about the Park Service is going to get their budget whacked, and one of the first things to go is the Florida Folk Festival, because it's really a bargain. I mean, people who come in and pay to get in here have a weekend worth of entertainment for not much money. I mean, it'd be hard put to go see a movie for what it costs to get in here now. And I don't know that the festival really is a moneymaker for the state, but I think it has survived, and that it's something bigger than that. It's a helping to preserve the culture that's getting paved over in the state of Florida, and that's worth something. Yeah, I don't know if you can put a dollar value on it, but that's worth a lot. And the times that the festival has been threatened, the community of people, now not just the old-time players or the singer-songwriters or the this band or that band, but everybody has gotten together and said, wait a minute, guys, this is something, and the people the non-musicians who have come here year after year, they write letters to the state, to the governor, to their legislator to say, hey, this is something you got to keep. And thus far, they've been successful in keeping it going. So hopefully we can keep that spirit going.
Are there any questions you wish I'd asked you?
Can't think of anything right now. Of course, when I get on my bike and head back to the campground, I'll think of half a dozen.
Oh, I have one for you.
Okay.
There are a lot of stages. Some are new and some have been here all along. Mm-hmm. What's your favorite stage?
I would say the Old Marble, because it's the first stage here. It's the only one they had back in the 50s. And it's always a real kind of a walk through the past to go play on that stage. And I consider it an honor. So that's the one. That's the one where I tell, excuse me, I tell my gang that comes in. I say, okay, you know, we're not together all the time, but we come together like this. And some of the stuff we do, we're a little out of practice on, a little ragged around the edges. But when we play at this marble stage, we've got to get it right. Because that's usually recorded down there. But that's my favorite out of the ones that are here.
So this story, this recording should be preserved and maybe seen 30, 50 years from now.
Okay.
What would you want those people to know about you and the festival?
About me and the festival. Well, like I say, it's my favorite event of the year, out of, well, any kind of event, musical or whatever. It's the thing that I plan my year around, and I hope that that kind of spirit, and I know a lot of other people are the same way. Like my sister comes every year. She's not a folk musician, but she and her husband come every year. I have cousins come in from Atlanta. It's a family type thing, and hopefully we'll have families around 50 years from now who enjoy an outing like this, whether they play music or not. And I think, let me say, hello, future folks, and I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you, Lloyd.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise.